of centre-left politics, despite the huge size of that landslide in 1997. In fact, by the late 1990s, the world was very different, and there were openings for our ideas that people of that generation either failed or didn't want to recognise. And by the time of the great financial crash, the need for a renewed kind of social democracy was obvious. Yet still, Labour stuck to the politics of caution and fought shy of a really progressive vision for our country. My experience tells me if you don't have the confidence to be who you are and popularise what you believe in, you might as well pack up and go home. And the problem with that no, we can't approach is that it becomes circular. Research carried out by the respected election expert, Professor John Curtis, shows that as the Labour Party ceased to talk loudly and proudly about progressive ideals and policies, so those ideals and policies became less popular. So we've got to get over the past and move forward to the future. Yes, we must learn from our history in the way that John has mentioned, but we can't be prisoners of it. It must not set the parameters for what we do now in these changed times. We must go forward with far greater self-confidence. Take the big challenge of this Parliament, the economy. The Liberal Democrat coalition with the Tories argues that the debt is so high because of public spending profligacy before 2007. They now say public spending should be sacrificed at the altar of deficit reduction. The Prime Minister even claims that the action he's going to take to address the deficit will affect our whole way of life. Our whole way of life? Here's a question. When it comes to the Tories themselves, how are these public spending cuts going to affect their way of life? I mean, in times of austerity, maybe we're going to have to take a leaf out of George Osborne's book. If you can't get the bus, there's always a yacht. Conservative ministers let the cat out of the bag on Thursday when one of them said that those in greatest need ultimately bear the burden of paying off the debt. And another referred to university students being a burden on the taxpayer. Well, this is what we should be saying. Our debt did not rise because of spending on public services before 2007. It rose because the financial crisis caused tax receipts to fall and spending to rise. And yes, we should be big enough to say we should have better regulated the bankers that caused it. We should acknowledge that there needs to be cuts. But the best way to reduce our debt is to go for growth and job creation. This will lower benefit payments and increase tax revenues. The CIPD estimates that the measures this coalition is contemplating will throw 750,000 workers onto the dole queue and do precisely the opposite. So now is the time for us to build a progressive coalition for growth and jobs. Take our public services. When free market thinking has been so comprehensively discredited, should we presume the introduction of choice and the market into public sector services is the only way to reform? Perhaps we could start, as they have done so successfully in Newcastle City Council, by encouraging trade unions, workers and users to put together and implement in-house plans for improving services. Maybe we ought to finally think about democratising education authorities and hospital boards and giving people a meaningful say in how things are run. Talking of which, look at our democracy. And God, they were wriggling out that one early, weren't they? For years, we thought that electoral reform was not a mainstream issue. Well, it is now. People are hugely frustrated with our outdated first-past-the-post electoral system and the lack of choice it gives them. They are also, frankly, fed up with the adversarial punch-and-judy politics which the current system promotes. What we have now is a small-state, neoliberal coalition determined to force through boundary changes purely for party political reasons. It ain't the new politics. New politics requires a new system, and people are crying out for it. The alternative vote solves some of these problems, but when it comes to electoral reform, we need to be bolder and more ambitious in our thinking. So we should talk tall, get out there and popularise our politics. In some of the polling districts in my constituency, people queued around the block waiting to vote at polling stations for more than an hour, South Africa style. We saw turnouts of over 70% in places. after a terrible 18 months during which we saw the awful underbelly of politics with all its sleaze and expenses exposed. Who would have thought it? People are interested in politics again. You hear people talk about it on the bus, on the train, in the restaurant. They want to be inspired. But the reason no party won this election was because no one really inspired them. So we have a mission. Let's make history and not be prisoners of it. Let's stop doing social democracy by stealth, but do it in the most clear and exciting way possible. Let's hold fast. Let's hold fast to the three ideas that brought all of us here today: equality, democracy, and sustainability. And let's remind ourselves that after the crash, in a world where people expect involvement and transparency as a right, and at a time when the planet continues to burn, those ideas have never been more needed. It all comes down to what Martin Luther King called the fierce urgency of now. This surely is no time for the politics of out-of-control markets. It's no time to be leaving our most vulnerable people to sink or swim while the super-rich remain untouched. It's no time to leave corporate power unchallenged and bankrupt political systems basically unchanged. We have got a plentiful supply of passion, but we also need to rediscover our confidence. Now, if today is anything to go by, it's already happening, but it's not enough to walk out of this hall feeling good and lively. Tomorrow, next week, next year, we've got to roll up our sleeves and take our politics to the people. Thank you.